Welcome back to the channel, guys. In this episode, I'm going to do a tensioner pulley, an idler pulley, and a serpentine belt on this Yukon behind me. So stick with us. So I recently picked up this Yukon Denali. It's a 2002 GMC Yukon Denali XL. Yes, it does say 2 cars, 1 garage on the windshield. So we're gonna start by popping the hood. This is a pretty straightforward, simple job. This is what it sounds like currently. We're gonna take care of that. First thing you're gonna wanna do is remove this air ducting here. There's a Phillips screw right here on this hose clamp that you're gonna wanna loosen. And then over here on the throttle body, there's another one. This is what they look like. The next thing you're going to want to do is remove this from the airbox, and then up here you're going to want to pull on it and remove this part of it from the throttle body. In a lot of cases, this coolant hose here, if you can see this little prong will be inside this hole, so you may have to pry this bracket for this coolant hose out of there as well. Okay, once you have the air ducting removed, you can identify the tensioner pulley right here. This is the one that keeps tension on the belt to keep it from squealing. This particular vehicle, well, we're gonna cut that. Oh, and then my flashlight doesn't work anymore. Great. This particular vehicle, when you start it up, the belt squeaks and it just stays squeaking, and when you drive it, it gets worse. I've checked the water pump, I've checked all the pulleys. The only thing I can think of right now at this point is to replace the tensioner, the idler, and the serpentine belt. The reason for this is because I don't know the history of this vehicle, and I don't know if those things have been replaced or not. So that's a good place to start. Typically, when I hear a belt squeak on any kind of GM LS engine, this 6-liter, a 5.3, a 4.8, normally what I think of is the water pump is leaking and it's dripping down on the belt, and once coolant gets on the belt, it starts to squeal and make those noises. This water pump has been done before and it is not leaking, so I'm gonna go ahead and move forward with these things, and hopefully when I'm done with this job, this belt will not squeak anymore. What I have here is a Continental serpentine belt kit. This comes with the tensioner, the idler, and the serpentine belt. So this whole thing is basically a kit. You can get it on Rock Auto. I think I paid like $65 for this whole kit, and it was shipped to my door next day. So I think I'm gonna need a 15mm wrench, a 15mm socket, a 3/8 drive ratchet, and a short 15mm socket. This one is obviously a deep well. I may need other things. I did need that screwdriver, the flathead, to remove the hose clamps. I'll give you a close-up. These are the hose clamps that need to be loosened before you can remove the air ducting here. So it's either an 8mm or a flathead screwdriver, whichever one is easier for you to use. First thing I'm going to do is remove the sleeve from the packaging. I'm actually going to open this, and the reason for that is because I'm going to draw the belt routing diagram on this piece of paper. So before I start, I'm going to look at the alternator, identify the idler pulley, the tensioner pulley, the crank pulley, the water pump, the power steering pulley, all those things. I'm going to identify those, and I'm going to trace on this piece of paper how the belt moves around those pulleys, so that once I get everything apart, I have a reference to look at, so that I can quickly just put the belt back where it needs to be, and I don't have to question it. It's exactly how it was when I took it apart. So I'm just gonna grab a Sharpie, and right here is the top right side, and this is the alternator. So I'm gonna draw a circle and put an A in the circle. That's where I'm gonna start, and I'm gonna follow the belt down. Straight below that is the power steering pump. The lowest part is the crank pulley. Just above the crank pulley is the water pump. Above that, a little further and to the right, is the idler pulley. Now if I move over here, I see a tensioner pulley. And then it goes back down to the crank. So I've identified all the pulleys here, and now I'm going to draw on this piece of paper how the belt moves around these pulleys so that I can just quickly look back at it and get this job done. So looks like it goes around the alternator, around the power steering pulley, comes up around the water pump, back down to the crank, over to the tensioner, underneath the idler, and back up to the alternator. So that is my belt diagram. I'm going to double check to make sure that that looks exactly how the belt looks on the vehicle. So what I like to do is just set this to the side, and the first thing you're going to have to do is release the tension on this tensioner pulley. So you're going to take a 15 millimeter, you're going to pry it inward toward the other pulleys, and it's going to create slack on this belt. Once you get slack on this belt, you can take this portion of it and slip it out past this idler pulley and then start to unroute the belt and remove it. I apologize for the wind. I swear every time I decide I want to film out here, it gets windy. So we're going to release the tension. And then unroute the belt. And it's as simple as that. Now that I have the belt removed, the very next step is to open the kit and remove the belt. The first thing I do is check to make sure that this belt and this belt are the same exact length, and they also have the same exact amount of ribs. This one has 6, so this new one should also have 6. You want to double check this stuff before you go any further, because it's really important to know this. Otherwise you may install everything and try to put this belt on to find out it's wrong and have to return it. So it's better to know those types of things sooner than later, so we're going to double check everything right out of the gate. It's kind of hard to get the right angle here all by myself, but I'll remove the belt from the packaging, and I'll take this belt, set them side by side, and I'll usually, if I'm by myself, I'll stick my foot at the bottom here and I'll pull up, and I'll compare the two. These two belts seem about the same length. This one right now appears to be just a little bit shorter, and that can happen over time. As these belts wear out, they tend to stretch a little bit, and there can be small differences, but overall, if they're very close in length or diameter, then usually you're good to go. Now the next step here is going to be very difficult for you guys to see, but there's two 15 millimeter bolts. There might even be three, I can't tell. Yep, so there's three 15 millimeter bolts that hold this tensioner in place. What I'm going to do is remove these three bolts and remove the tensioner assembly, and I'm going to compare it to the new one. Had to go get some gloves. Just a little disclaimer, when I did the video for the headlight restoration on the Acura, my buddy Tyler was here to help me film that, and he came and showed up with a box of gloves, and he made me promise not to use these rubber gloves unless we were working on something together. And sorry dude, I definitely ran out of gloves and had to start using them, but I will buy you a new box of gloves, I promise. So moving forward here, I'll go ahead and crack this bolt loose, second one loose, and down a little further is the third one. Oh, that one's tight. Ooh. You want to crack the third one loose as well. Hopefully you guys don't break your hands on things like I just did. You know that sound when a bolt falls and then you don't hear it hit the ground? That just happened. Found it. With that being said, be careful when you take these bolts out, not to lose them. Now, in some applications, there are going to be different length bolts, sometimes even different size bolts. So you want to pay attention to where they come from and compare them to the other bolts you remove. In this case, there is one short one and two long ones. The two long ones are the exact same length, so you don't have to really remember where those go. But you want to make sure that you remember that the short one goes furthest to the bottom. I'm going to give you guys a better look at where this tensioner is positioned. This is one of the bolts. There's another one right here, and then way down here is the third one. God damn it. Sorry Tyler, I gotta use another glove. And I'm bleeding. Alright, the next step. This is the idler pulley. This is the next thing that needs to be removed. This also happens to be a 15 millimeter. Alright, now with everything removed, you can see that at first glance, this tensioner, which is the new one, and this tensioner, which is the old one, look like they're right. Everything kind of appears to be the same. Now, what you really need to pay attention to is how many ribs are on the pulley, which if you got the right belt, they should match, but double check anyway. This one looks like 6. You want to compare the two. Make sure that the diameter of the pulley is the same. Other areas to look for differences are how long these areas are. So you want to really come over here and pay attention to the length here, and that looks the same, and just kind of go around and just identify, pay close attention to the details and make sure that all these areas look the same, and as long as they do, you're okay to move forward. When you remove this idler pulley, there is going to be a spacer when you remove it from the vehicle, so make sure you keep the spacer and note its orientation. You know, this protruding area wants to face down into the bearing on the back side, and the bolt goes through it, and then there's a washer on this side. So when you take this apart, you want to make sure you know how that goes back together. As long as you know that, you can move on to comparing the idler pulleys to each other. The bearings look about the same size, the overall shape looks the same. As you can see, they are the same height, which means they're the same width, and then they are indeed the same diameter. So it would appear that all the parts I have for this vehicle are correct. So I'm going to move forward with reinstalling the tensioner, the idler, and the serpentine belt, and this job should hopefully take care of this belt squeak. So I'm going to start by reinstalling the new idler arm. As I mentioned before, make sure the washer is on the right side. Make sure the spacer is facing the correct direction. Essentially just put everything back the way you found it. Now when you're done getting this nice and tight, you want to make sure that this pulley spins. It spins freely in my case, but if it doesn't in yours, that means you got something backwards, something's different. So you always want to double check to make sure everything spins the way it did before, assuming yours didn't fail to the point where they don't spin anymore. But like I said, it's a good idea to ensure that you know this pulley spins freely without any kind of crazy noise or being locked up and not being able to move. The next step is to reinstall the new tensioner. Now again, we noted that the two longer bolts on the tensioner were up top, so we'll put those back in their place, and the shorter one was down on the bottom. Okay, now that the new tensioner is installed and the new idler pulley is installed, the only thing we have left to do is to grab the new belt and route it like this. What I like to do is climb up here, make sure I can rest myself on something that won't break. Normally what I do is start on the crank pulley because it's hard to reach, and then bring it up around the water pump, back down to the power steering pulley, up to the alternator, put it on the tensioner first, double check that everything looks like it's in the right place. I fit my wrench. Ooh, they changed up the bolt size on me. Be right back. So the new socket size is actually a 16. What I'll do is fasten the socket to the tensioner here. Now I don't know if you can see this real well. So you fasten it to the tensioner and turn it clockwise to release the tension, and then you will push this slack side underneath that idler pulley, and that should be that. Now that the belt is back installed again, hopefully when I start this thing it doesn't have a belt squeak. As you can hear, the belt squeak is now gone. Well, that about wraps it up for the Serpentine belt, tensioner, and idler on a 2002 Yukon Denali XL. Hopefully you guys found this useful. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like, drop a comment, maybe subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.